BV from the Netherlands. He oversees all operations and business development in the Asian region, and Orgaworld Asia BV has a vast experience with processes for conversion and valorization of organic residues into high-end, valuable and marketable products, as well as sustainable energy solutions. So, welcome, Julius.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I think I'll start by saying a word of thanks because I'm really happy to see so many of you here. I think all the seats are filled almost. And why I'm happy about that is because I think that the topic I will talk to you about today is a very important topic. I'm also thankful that apparently the organizers of the fair have agreed with this and have decided to invite me to speak. As mentioned, my name is Julius de Jong. I'm the Managing Director of Orgaworld Asia, and we have tremendous experience with processing organic waste. We've done so over 16 years, and we're active in 3 continents. In Europe, we're a company from the Netherlands, in North America, and now in Asia as well. And basically, we have a unique business because we're not just a technology provider, but we design our plants, we design our own facilities, we build them, we operate them, we finance and own them. And that means that we understand the difficulties and the complexities in the entire process. We're not just focused on one part, but we take responsibility and risk in all of the parts. So today, I'm talking to you about why mechanical and biological treatment and organic waste processing are essential for sustainable waste management. I think it's important to start with my agenda real quick. Who am I talking to? I think it's important to know this, so I'll start, and I hope many of the people that I'm aiming this presentation for are present in the room. I'll talk about waste management and what the objectives are. I'll talk a little bit about the waste hierarchy. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this, but I think it's important to show the different policy options. I'll share a quick history lesson, our experiences in the Netherlands and in Europe, and show the path that we have taken. I'll talk a little bit about the situation in Asia today, and the urgency to do something and to change, but also the opportunity. I'll conclude with some policy recommendations that we see, and finally, of course, the wrap up and the conclusion of my entire presentation. So for who is this presentation? I think first of all, I'm talking to policymakers. They have a very, very important responsibility because the choices and the decisions they make today will have a very long-term effect and long-term consequences, both in terms of environmental impact, but also in terms of resource availability for future generations. Are we squandering our resources, or are we recycling and recovering? I'm talking to representatives and people working in the various environmental departments, and they have an equally important role and responsibility because they are implementing the policies. They're the hands and feet of the policymakers. So their job is very, very important. Of course, I'm also talking to my colleagues, other waste management companies who could potentially be partners, or could potentially be clients, or we could work in other forms together. And of course, lastly, I'm talking to the broader stakeholders. And the stakeholders are those people who are interested to see what happens with their waste, if their resources are recovered, and how their tax money is spent. Having that said, let's look at what the traditional waste management objectives are. First of all, and this is really a public health argument, the goal is destruction of pathogens. And secondly, of course, volume reduction, environmental protection, mineralization and immobilization of hazardous substances, land, material, and non-renewable energy conservation, and public acceptance, and affordable capital cost. And if you look at these 7 objectives, you can't really argue with them. They're all very much valid, and they're all very much practical. But there is one thing which is missing from these 7. And I think this is a very, very important thing. And I think we need to change our ways and focus more towards this slide, or these goals. These are sustainable waste management objectives. And what we see here is only 3 points. The first and the second are basically the previous slide, but just in different wordings. But the third point, not passing on today's waste problem to our children and future generation, this is the crucial point. And this makes the difference between just waste management and sustainable waste management. Because if this third point is our objectives, everything we do and all the policies we will formulate will change. So I think this is a really crucial point. And to share on a personal note, I think for me, this is in part why I get out of bed in the morning. Because I would like to leave this earth, this beautiful place, just a tad bit better than I have found it. And I think with the work that we do with Orgaworld, we can definitely have an impact and contribute in that goal. So I think to consider our future generations and the responsibility that we have, it's a crucial point. What are the policy options? What choices do we have? I'll talk you through the waste hierarchy. And like I mentioned, I'm sure that all of you know this very well. You've seen this everywhere. And it's basically the different policy and technology options that we have for processing our waste. I'm saying processing, but it's actually 2 types that what we're doing. Either it's disposal, which means simply getting rid of the waste, or it's diversion. And from the bottom of the pyramid to the top, the bottom is the least preferred options, and at the top these are the most preferred options. And only the top 4 that are focusing on diversion, those are the sustainable technology, the sustainable policies. And with Orgaworld, we are only active in the top 4. We're focusing on recovery, recycling, and reuse. And in a small part, we're also focused on reduce. Having established this, and I'll come back to this later during the presentation, I'll take you through a short history lesson. Because even though today, in Europe, we're doing pretty well with our waste management, and I think throughout the world we're looked at as an example, but we've come quite a way from where we are today. And I'll take you back to 1875. Basically, we had waste scattered around, and it was a big mess, and it was an uncontrolled mess. So our policy started to focus on waste collection. So we started to focus on waste collection, and the key means was centralizing our waste. So centralized, controlled dump sites, and later landfills. Moving forward 100 years, in 1975, we had a really, really big insight. We learned a very, very valuable lesson that I think changed waste management and will continue to change waste management practice. And that insight was this, that waste, and organic waste in particular, is not inert. That means it changes over time, and it's influenced by its environment. And that meant that we started to realize the harmful environmental effects in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, pollutants, spread of disease, and we started to focus on controlling our waste, using technology and fixing the problems that were emerging because of the waste being in the landfill. So we started capping our landfills, and we started filtering off the gas, but we didn't really process it yet. And that's the next step. Because moving forward, we're talking the 1990s now, we realized that we need to divert the waste, the organic waste, away from the landfill, because it's the organic waste that is causing the harm, and especially the big environmental impact. And so we formulated integrated policies, and in 1999, we accepted a landfill directive in the European Union, and that basically centralized about diversion as much waste as possible from the landfill. and especially organic waste. And what you can see here on the picture, for instance, these are called klikos in Holland, and basically they're source separating of the organic waste. And this changed everything. And the thing to add, what was part of the landfill directive, was also the taxation of waste going to the landfill. And what that did, it created an incentive for businesses like Orgaworld to start processing the waste in more sustainable ways, so it created feasibility for alternative. Because of course, just driving it somewhere and dumping it is obviously the cheapest way to get rid of your waste. But it's not that third point from the sustainability point of view, where we're not taking responsibility of the future consequences of the harmful effect of this waste. Moving forward still, early 2000s, we started to realize that this waste is actually not something that we need to get rid of, but it's actually a resource. And from that point, we started to focus on creating a circular economy. And actually just recent, on September 14 of this year, the Dutch government has committed to becoming a fully circular economy by 2050. And I think this is the future. If we're talking about waste as a resource, it changes everything. It changes the way we look at it. And for Orgaworld, we always have been, and we will continue to be, of essential importance for this transition to a circular economy, where we see waste as a resource instead of something we want to get rid of. And in terms of future outlook, I think that we are shifting more to bio-based. And this will be part of the circular economy, where we're seeing that organic fraction of the waste as a resource for minerals, for biopolymers, etc. And there's a lot of possibility in this field, but I'll share with you 3 practical examples that we are doing today. For instance, we are converting organic waste, and we're creating 100% organic NPK fertilizers from waste fraction, 1. 2, we're creating biostimulators, using microorganisms to fight plant disease and to stimulate plant growth and create life in the soil. A third example is tailor-made compost products. We're not just producing compost, but we are able to assess the land of a particular farmer and see the nutrient requirement in that soil and the nutrient availability. We can assess the nutrient need of the crop that farmer wants to grow, and based on what's missing, we can add the nutrients coming from an organic waste source. So if you talk about the future in terms of waste and in terms of waste management, I think the future is very green. And we need to continue to move in that path and seeing waste as a resource. And then about Asia today. I think the pictures on the slide give it away. Asia is dominated by the organic waste fraction. On average in this region, 62% of the waste is organic material. And this data comes from the World Bank. And what I think is also interesting about this pie chart here is that if you look at it, you see that up to 90% is available for recovery using the right technology. And of course, one example of that technology would be mechanical and biological treatment, where we have one stream of waste and we can separate the valuable materials, and we end up with an organic fraction for which we can then extract the energy by means of anaerobic digestion. To share with you some key numbers. Each day in Asia, 740,000 tons of waste is produced. Every day. Every day. And of that, 500,000 tons, and that is 500,000 tons of organic waste per day is produced. Every day. And the worrying thing is that the key means of disposing is still dumping and landfilling. And I'll tell you why that is worrying. Because the organic fraction of that waste has a greenhouse gas emission potential of 1,000 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per ton of waste. And this is a problem that we need to address. Another thing that is unique about the situation here in Asia is that because of this high percentage of organic material and the way we are preparing and cooking and the way we are eating in this region, there is a very high moisture content in the municipal solid waste in this region. And what that means is that the calorific value, the energy value when we burn this waste, is extremely low. And of course, this explains the title of my presentation, An Apple Doesn't Burn. Because really, it doesn't work. You cannot burn a very wet substance. You cannot burn a wet organic waste fraction. Another reason for urgency is that by 2025, the numbers that I showed you before, they're expected to double. So we're not talking about 500,000 ton of organic waste per day, but we're talking about 1 million ton of waste per day here in Asia alone. And these are massive, massive amounts. Another reason for urgency, I believe, is that in this region, 40% of the world population lives. By 2050, the world population is expected to grow to 9.7 billion, of which 5.7 billion are expected to live here. Another reason for urgency that we see is intensive agriculture. Because these 9.7 billion people and these 5.7 billion people here in Asia, they all need to eat. So we need to be able to extract enough value, enough nutrients from the agricultural sector in order to feed all these people. And in order to keep up that intensive agriculture for which this region is known, we of course need nutrients. And not only nutrients, but we need organic matter. And at this moment, there is virtually no recycling of organic matter. We are bringing nutrients to the soil, chemical nutrients, and that changes the structure of the soil. It hardens. And it makes it more difficult for next crops to grow. So it's not only nutrients that we are lacking in our soils, but it's also organic matter. And that can be returned by recycling the compost, or turning it into compost and extracting that nutrient, bringing it back, and bringing the, closing the loop, basically, of the organic matter, returning it to the soil. Another reason for urgency, I believe, is that currently, recycling rates are only between 10 and 40%. With this growing population of going to 9.7 billion, we will need to recover the resources that we are using now. We will need to recycle, because if we don't, we will simply not have enough. So that 90% I referred to earlier, we need to increase these numbers, and of course again, mechanical and biological treatment is the most obvious way to do that. Because there's only one way, there's only one stream of waste at this moment. There is no source separation. So we need technology that can deal with that. And of course, as I mentioned, there's finite resources, metals, plastic, papers, cardboard, fossil fuels, and we need to recover and recycle and reuse these materials, because otherwise we're simply running out. And of course there's the opportunity, because with that 500,000 ton of organic waste, or with that 1 million ton by 2025, we can process it, and we can turn it into valuable products. And the same is for our resources in terms of materials, in terms of recycling. Mechanical biological treatment is a big solution and a big opportunity here. To share a little bit more of the numbers, the Asian Development Bank has calculated that per year, in Asia alone, the market for organic matter and nutrients, being the compost, is worth over 900 million each year. That's almost 1 billion. And although that might sound a lot, I personally think this number can be much higher. Of course, another opportunity is the prevention of greenhouse gases, leachate, spread of pathogens. So processing the organic waste will have a lot of benefits, not only economical. And of course, if we process this waste, that 62% of our municipal solid waste fraction will not end up in the landfill. It will result in massive landfill space savings. And then another argument, because there's another trend. If you remember that waste hierarchy, there's dumping, controlled dumping, landfilling, and incineration. And what we're seeing in Asia today is that more and more countries are considering incineration as a good alternative for disposing of the waste. And I would say I disagree. Because for one, the technology is very expensive. On average, a incineration plant will cost you between 200 and 300 million US dollars, whereas a mechanical biological treatment plant, combined with AD and aerobic digestion, will cost you between 60 and 80 million. And we're talking about similar processing capacity. So the operating costs are significantly higher. And another thing, in China, for instance, because of this high moisture content and low calorific value, what they're doing is they're burning coal. They're co-incinerating the waste, and they're using a finite fossil fuel to burn something of value. So they're burning something of value to burn something else of value, both of which are finite, both of which are limited, and both of which are running out, and both of which are needed. So that's a practice which for me doesn't make sense. And the only argument that I can give for that is that the space saving, the volume reduction, that is indeed something that's happening. But is that the only goal? Another example is Japan. In Japan, there's a lot of incineration plants, a lot of smaller incineration plants also, and there they're burning paper, cardboard, and plastics. And 1 ton of recycled paper sells at the moment for about $150 per ton. 1 ton of PET plastic sells for about $220 per ton. 1 ton of HDPE plastic sells for about $440 per ton. And compost 1 ton sells between about $90 and in some cases $220 per ton. So again, these numbers don't add up. We are burning very valuable material to burn other valuable material using technology that is extremely expensive. And there's an alternative, mechanical biological treatment, anaerobic digestion, composting technology, which are cheaper, give greater flexibility, and enable much higher recovery rates. So for me, just from an economical or even a logical point of view, it doesn't make sense. And of course, the opportunity is to increase the recycling rates from that 10 to 40% and bring it up to 90, or in some cases even higher. And I think that should be the future, especially if we're considering the circular economy, where we have to recover these resources. And that, of course, gives us the opportunity to close the loop instead of squandering resources. I'm almost at the end of my presentation, but before I go to the conclusion, I will share some policy recommendations. The first one being this: start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with large volume industrial organic waste. Start with waste from food processing industry. Start with restaurant waste. Start with hotel waste or commercial waste, food that is outdated. Because these are large volumes, it's easy, it's relatively easy to set up infrastructure for this and set up recycling facilities. So this is low-hanging fruit. Secondly, implement source separation in new developments. In new developments, it's much easier to implement change and to create new habits. Because source separation is crucially important because the quality of the organic material needs to be preserved in order to go back to the land on which we grow our food. So source separation, new construction projects, new developments, implement it from the start. And the third point, focus on formulating incentives instead of penalties, because the market will always be faster than any enforcement can be. And that brings me to my conclusion. I think the first point is we need to re-evaluate the assumptions and goals we have for waste management. It's no longer only about the prevention of spread of pathogens or the argument for public health. We got that covered. It's certainly not about volume reduction. It's actually on the contrary. It's about conservation of resources and conservation of value. Second point is we have the opportunity to strike 2 birds with 1 stone. The first bird being the problem of organic waste here in Asia. Massive volumes, 500,000 ton today, 500,000 ton today, 1 million ton by 2025. We can solve that organic waste problem by processing it. Second problem, of course, is the intensive agriculture, where the organic matter is needed and the nutrients are needed. So those 2 birds, those 2 problems, we can strike with one stone, being processing of organic waste. And thirdly, the population growth. It requires new resource strategies, and I think the most obvious and the most clear one right now, in the current context, is to start implementing mechanical and biological treatment. And the fourth and last point is what we don't account for today, our children will account for tomorrow. What we don't account for today, our children will account for tomorrow. And I think this calls for a huge responsibility from everyone here, also from us, to change our ways and to focus on recycling and recovery. And to close on a note, what Orgaworld can do to help in this process is, of course, we have over 16 years of experience designing, building, operating, financing, and owning various waste treatment facilities, both organic and inorganic. And we have gained a lot of experience in the process and learned a lot of lessons. So we understand the complexity and challenges of waste management. And we also understand the opportunities. So for that reason, I would invite everyone here who's working in this field to get in touch. My details are here on the screen. Also our booth, which is 3G18, which is right over here. So please get in touch and learn together how we can turn your problems into opportunities. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Julius. That was an excellent presentation. And I think very usefully it took us through the transition in thinking on waste management, moving not only to circular economy, which a lot of people are talking about here in Hong Kong and the rest of Asia, but even to a closed-loop bio-based economy, which seemed to be perhaps a slightly new concept to some of us. And thank you for bringing out the opportunities from managing organic waste well, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and waste to energy, as well as in terms of nutrients for agriculture and for soils. So the various opportunities from managing our waste well. And I think some of those numbers, like the 1 million tonnes of waste a year by 2025, really do make us think, and we can see how big the challenge is. And now I'd like to